Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this May 12th for a regular meeting of Lunenburg Town Council. And this council meeting is being broadcast via Zoom, as has become our practice now that we are living under a new existence with public health emergency requirements. And to that end, before we get to the business of our council meeting, I just want to take a moment to thank the citizens of the town for their compliance with the restrictions imposed as a result of the public health emergency caused by COVID-19. I've just been very proud of how well we've done. And I think I speak for all of council when I say that the compassion and the community spirit that's been seen and observed and experienced in this community has been wonderful to see. And a great example of that was over the weekend with the virtual run walk, which was initially started as a fundraising effort and spirits lifting endeavor by citizens in Colchester County, and was taken up by some local citizens here in Lunenburg, Jackie Lee Chisholm and Shauna Miller. And they, with their encouragement, a number of us joined in, and we were able to contribute from Lunenburg County over $4,000 to that effort in support of the families of victims of the terrible shooting I experienced last month. So thank you very much to the citizens of the town. And so we will move on with the regular business that we have on our agenda. And the first item on the agenda is an approval of that business. So thank you very much, Councillor Risser, for moving that. And is there a seconder? Joseph Carnevale, Councillor Carnevale, thank you very much. And just again, a note that we do have items of priority bolded, and I think there's just one item today. So all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, so the motion is carried. Thank you very much. And the next item is the approval of our minutes of May 5th. And I would just mention that I would ask for a very minor amendment, not to any of the important business of our council, but really just to the introduction, where I would love it if we could just add the mention of the vessel, the HMCS Fredericton, which is out of the Port of Halifax, which from which the helicopter that experienced that terrible tragedy came. So if that could be added, I would appreciate that, but I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes with that amendment, perhaps. Is that Councillor Carnevale so moving? Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Croft. Any further amendments or additions required or suggested? Hearing none, all in favor? Thank you, and there'd be no one to oppose. The motion is carried. Moving through then, as listed, we have no public hearings or presentations today, and neither any correspondence nor committee meeting minutes and recommendations. So we move right into number 6 on our agenda, which is entitled Unfinished Business. And under A, Corporate Services, we're going to have a look at some of the things impacting our 2021 budget approval. So I would perhaps ask that Ms. Dagley, our finance director, would speak to those items under that agenda item, please.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. I guess maybe to start, just a reminder to the public that Council is seeking their input on the draft 2021 budget until May 22nd, and that their submissions can be forwarded to my attention either by email, mail, or the drop box at Town Hall, and that copies of the budget are available for download on the town's website, and also are included in the agenda package for today. I also wanted to point out to council that the departmental summary that was requested as part of the April 28th meeting, perhaps by Councillor Croft, meeting has now been included in the budget package, and it's on page 1 of the budget package for your reference. There was one capital item that Public Works is seeking pre-approval on today, Your Worship. It is the backflow prevention study for the lift stations. There's a fuller description of that item on page 88 of the budget document, which I believe might be page 98 of your addenda package. And perhaps I could turn it over to Mr. Tillard to give you more information on that item.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Worship. So this is I don't remember if councillors remember the discussions back in the fall, I believe, or it might have been earlier this year, related to getting to our decisions relating to the wastewater treatment plant, but also reiterated in the, I think both studies, the Dillon report highlighted it, that we have an issue with saltwater intrusion into the system. And at times it's very high rates of flow coming in. I think on the order, if I remember correctly, around close to 40% of flow at times was determined to be salt water, which is causing havoc basically with the processing, not necessarily damage, although I'm sure there's some of that as well in terms of corrosion, but it's really related to the process and the efficiency of the process and the effectiveness of the processes. So this is highlighted in the Dillon report and mentioned in the original CBCL report that this needs to be addressed, and it's basically step 1 for us to determine what needs to be done here. We don't know what needs to be done here, and this is the purpose of this study.
And perhaps maybe I could just add that the budget is $40,000 for this item, and it's to be funded from gas tax.
Okay, I know I need more clarification on where this is in our budget document. Can you?
Sure, certainly,
guide
Your
us through
Worship.
that?
So there's a couple places you could find it, which that's sometimes the confusion. So on the funding pages of the budget document, which are the very last 2 pages, page 101 and 102, but this particular item is on page 101 on the funding portion of the budget, the capital funding portion. It's probably about a third of the way down. It is noted in the left-hand column, seeking pre-approval May 12th. If you're viewing it on your iPad, it probably is got a yellow highlight on it. Yes, there, Heather has it up on the screen now. But page 88 does provide like a brief description that Mr. Tillard has just gone over about the study.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification or that guidance through that. So the request today is for pre-approval of that particular item, which does appear in our agenda and which has been noted would be funded through gas tax. And I assume that's because they need to get going on this part of the work. Time is important. If that's a needed item for our wastewater treatment. I'm sorry, I don't have all the council on screen at once, so there we go. Okay, now I do. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Mosier.
Okay, so this is a $40,000 pre-approval, and it is to, I mean, what are we hoping to get from this? So we know we have an infiltration of salt water into our system. So what's the study going to tell us at the end of the day?
Thank you, Your Worship. Essentially, what is the source of it, and what are the possible resolution? What is the possible resolution? And the reason that's important as we launch into further decision making here is we don't know what we can actually attain, what's achievable in terms of reducing this. We really don't know the sources. We certainly suspect that some of the pumping stations, but that may not be all of it. And we don't know a portion of it is, and we don't know the extent of what is required to get this eliminated, because it has a very definitive effect on the processes going on there. And if it's something we're going to have to accommodate in the future, because it's something that's basically unfixable or the flow rates are too high, then that probably has a bearing on decisions being made related to that wastewater treatment plant.
But what I don't get is that where we work with the system every day, we're pretty familiar with it, and we can't identify where infiltrations of salt water is. What means do the consultants do that they can figure this out?
Well, there's going to be, I really don't know I'm sorry, Your Worship, thank you, the details, but it will involve some investigations, it will involve some measuring, it'll involve testing, field testing, basically, to see at different conditions, at different tide conditions, et cetera, to try to figure out where it'll involve measuring salinity at various points at various times, and I really don't know the extent of it, but it will enable us to track down where the source of it is, or the sources of it is.
Thank you. Mr. Tillard, are there other questions? Yes, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Lisa B. Just a matter of recollection, as I recall, we pre-approved the $40,000 at the meeting at which we discussed this, did we not? And so this is just asking for another pre-approval because you're over budget.
I think
No.
you're referring to a different item.
It is to a different item, Your Worship, and I, in looking at the agenda, this pre-approval, I guess, wasn't noted in the agenda. So
Okay,
maybe that's where
thanks.
some of the confusion has come.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, no, it wasn't listed. It wasn't separate bulleted, and there is another item that I think Councillor Risser's referencing with about the flood study, which is a different item, which was previously pre-approved and is now we're looking to add. The staff is asking to add some more to that budget, but this is for saltwater backflow prevention study. And I know in speaking and following this issue as closely as I can and trying to keep all of the variables straight or getting to some level of firmer understanding. I know one of the issues, for example, was the amount of saltwater infiltration that may actually be coming from our salting of roads. It was an unusual revelation found through the studies that have been conducted to date that the highest amounts of salinity seem to come during the winter months. And so there was some question as to what degree that amount of that salt water was infiltrating the system and causing some damage. We also had not previously had backflow prevention valves, and please correct me if I'm wrong on some of this, Mr. Tillard, but until recently. And so there's certainly a certain amount coming from backflow prevent or lack of backflow prevention. And so I think studying this is going to be very important in understanding the system more fully and trying to find the best fixes for the treatment process. So yes, Councillor Bachman.
Thanks, Your Worship. Question through to Mr. Tillard, I guess. Is this just going to identify problems, or is this also going to help us provide some solutions once they found some problems?
Well, my intent would be that we would be looking at solutions here. We certainly won't have detailed designs associated with it, but it will have a list of items that need to be addressed, and with budget estimates, shall we say, along with it.
Thank you.
So this is an item that's included in our budget currently, the one that we have been looking at for some time. It's a request for pre-approval so that this work can be undertaken. And so it would require a motion of council to give staff that pre-approval they need to move forward. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
I was just moving the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moved by the Deputy Mayor that pre-approval be given for this item. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Bachman. Thank you. Is there further discussion required on this motion? See any indication there is? So all in favor of pre-approval of the $40,000 required for this study noted, please indicate. And with all voting in favor, no one would be opposed. So the motion is carried and pre-approval is given. Thank you very much for that. Ms. Dagley, would you like to, there are a couple other things noted on our agenda. Would you like to make note of those for us or guide us through?
Certainly I can, Your Worship. I guess maybe I would turn over the next item to Mr. Bracken for his report regarding the town hall roof assessment.
Mr. Bracken, are you?
Yes,
able
thank
to guide
you.
us through that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just trying to pull up. Basically, this past year, we undertook a roof assessment for the town hall. We looked at the structure of the roof for snow load, as well as the exterior. We had the engineering company EXP do the assessment. Out of that report, there were some recommendations. The structure is in fairly good shape. It does need some reinforcement, and the exterior of the roof needs quite a bit of work. They provided us with some cost estimates for planning. Basically, the purpose of this report is for council's information. That one, we undertook the report, and two, this will be going on the 10-year capital plan for the town hall. And so we're still working on putting the project together, but basically in next year's budget, you will see sort of a fuller scale proposal for repairing the town hall roof. EXP provided in their report sort of a breakdown of cost estimates. It's important to keep in mind that those are, considered a Class D estimate, which is, the concept and preliminary design phase. So it's a pretty big spectrum there. They say about 20 to 40% accurate. So until the project, gets some more detail in there, it's a pretty ballpark number. But we did want to bring it to council's attention that we'll be looking to undertake the repairs, hopefully in next year's budget.
Thanks very much for bringing that to our attention. I don't think for those of us on council, that's a huge surprise that there's maintenance work required. I think most of us, if not all of us, know that there have been occasions when we've needed a bucket in the middle of the town council chamber to gather some water. So it's unfortunate, but it's a reality that these older buildings need lots of upkeep. And so thank you for attending to that. And unfortunately, we'll need some bigger dollars in the not too distant future to address it more fully. Yes, Councillor Croft.
Thank you, Worship. Paul. And what did that report cost us, and how many tenders did we receive back on that request?
Through your worship, to Councillor Croft, it was approximately $14,000, and we received 3 submissions.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Mosier.
Well, I always like these reports are driving me crazy. $14,000. I mean, there's no question when you look at some of the photos. I'm not an engineer and I'm not a contractor, but you know, the roof does look like it needs some work. And as you mentioned, it does leak. So that's fairly obvious. So I don't know why we needed to pay that kind of money for that. And then with regard to these other, you know, roof integrity, structural loads and all this kind of stuff, I don't know whatever happened to the phrase, they don't build it like they used to, because I think our forefathers probably built these buildings a heck of a lot stronger than we do today. And every time we get one of these reports back, there's something wrong with one of the roofs. And I would think it's probably, I like, you know, it's almost like if they don't find something, they can't justify the money they charge us. So it just, it's just mind-boggling, you know, some of these things that are obvious and we get these reports for. I think we got to start doing things a little different.
Your worship, perhaps Ms. Dagley could explain why this is required. It's part of a federal provincial cost sharing program for gas tax monies.
Sure, if you'd like to. It's with respect to the action plans that were done some years ago. Is that right, Ms. Dagley? Could you explain?
Well, certainly, Your Worship, yes, that's, you know, as part of our gas tax funding, our annual gas tax funding, that's allotted to us, which is in the tune of $200,000 annually. There was a requirement for a climate action plan to be undertaken. And from that plan, there was some directives to look at the flat roofs and the snow loads on those. And that's part of the reason why this report was undertaken, Your Worship.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add, Mr. Bracken?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just that when the building code changed in 2014, and that's where one of the pieces of this is, as you know, the building code changed, the engineers actually go in and look at the structure, you know, and run the numbers to see if the beams and trusses can actually support what they're supposed to. And that's, you know, a lot of the modeling there is, you know, one of the things that the engineers are actually doing is they're crunching the numbers to make sure that, you know, the trusses and spans can support what they need to.
Yeah. Certainly the revisions to building codes have imposed much stricter and stronger requirements for buildings. And as the owner of an old house that's survived 100 years and without issue, I am with a renovation I'm anticipating soon, I have to make the walls thicker than they had been for the last 100 years because of the new building code. So I sympathize with our town and know what they're dealing with, I think, to a certain extent from personal experience. Yes, Councillor Mosier.
Well, just given the expense of these buildings, I guess I'd go back and echo the 2012 election when, you know, the cry was for the public that we have far too many public buildings. And by the way, you know, and as these costs become more prohibitive to hold these buildings, I think really we got to take steps and measures to to get these off our books.
We did just recently get rid of one flat roof building, so keep the momentum going, I think, is your message. So if we've finished, I think that was an information item primarily, which generated some interest and discussion. Thank you. Next on the agenda under the budget still is the bolded item with respect to the flood study and a $2,900 budget pre-approval for additional engineering work, which there is the staff report prepared for us. I believe by Mr. Tillard. Yeah, so are you able to speak to that for us, Mr. Tillard, please?
Oh, yes, Your Worship. Yeah, this is unfortunately, I never like going back for more money on things. And we're I'm learning as we go here a little bit. So this is a fairly new technology, but after we had started this work about approximately a month ago, it became apparent that there's the differences between the front harbor and the back harbor are significant. And we really only get measurements out of the front harbor. So this basically was we had actually priced in an added piece of work as an optional piece of work originally on this study to provide some more engineering work to determine essentially the difference between the front harbor and the back harbor. It really relates to the model itself, not so much to the actual flood analysis at the plant itself. So it relates to the functionality of the actual model, the 3D model. And this is a piece of work to determine those correlations between those front and the back harbor, so that can be input into the model. I did allow a little bit extra in the original budget, but not quite enough. So that's hence the $2,900.
Thank you for that. Sorry. Okay, are there questions of Mr. Tillard with respect to this request? Sorry. Yes, Councillor Mosier.
Well, once again, I really wasn't in favor of this project to start with. It's always nice to have information, but we have to be able to be able to do things with it. So again, if the water comes up 2 feet, it's pretty obvious that if you put something up somewhat higher than that, whether you choose it to be 3 feet or 5 feet. And I don't see this as any more than a little bit of a glorified toy, but so obviously I'm not for increasing it because I wasn't even for it to begin with.
Yes, Deputy Mayor.
As someone who was very in favor of it, after seeing the presentation that Mahone Bay is using it for, that to me, there was no question that it has tremendous value, both current and in the future. So, you know, we've already committed a fair bit of change to it to increase it by $2,900. Is unfortunate, but needs to be done. So I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, moving the recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? And I assume that would be for the draft motion that's in the report. Approval be given, yes, to the approved budget for the flood study from $45,000 to $47,900, including net HST, and funding for the same will be from deed transfer taxes. So is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Bachmann seconds. Thank you. Further discussion? I would just like to add to, I guess, the Deputy Mayor's enthusiasm for this project. I think it's extremely important. Who would have known, for example, that there's a drastic difference between the front harbor and the back harbor as far as tides and so on? Well, maybe some people would, but I certainly wouldn't have had any thought that that was a possibility. So I think even just recognizing that and the fact that you can't model on property in the back harbor the same way you would as property on the front harbor, I think is extremely interesting and valuable to know when we're planning and making decisions based on the best information we can possibly obtain. So, and I think it's not just, I do see the value as being very long-term as well. So not just for a specific project, although I think it'll be very important and helpful for the upgrades we're needing for the treatment facility. Any other, yes, Councillor Croft?
Yeah, well, I guess that would mean that the tides in Mahone Bay would be different from the tides in Lunenburg then too, I guess. So not to be funny about it, but I think it's just, I guess tides are different all around the world, so.
So any other thoughts to offer or questions to ask? No, so the motion is the draft motion we have seen, so I won't repeat it again, but all in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried, vote of 4-3 with Councillors Mosers, Croft and Carnevale voting in opposition. So the motion is carried on that, so we can move on to.
Oh, if I could, Your
sorry,
Worship,
yes. Sorry.
My apologies.
Go ahead.
For an item that is related to this, but not on the agenda, just because late getting information from municipal affairs staff. But there is an opportunity for us to apply for provincial funding for this project. So the Flood Risk Infrastructure Investment Program, or FRIP, has been announced, and this program has developed to encourage municipalities to invest in infrastructure that reduces flood risks and community vulnerability. Typically, the program funds up to 50% of eligible project costs for expenditures after April 1, and luckily this time the stars have aligned for this particular project. But in order to apply for the funding, which is the application due date is May 25th, it does require a motion of support from council for staff to seek out that funding. And if we were successful, we obviously wouldn't need to use all of our own D-transfer tax towards this project. I could,
yes.
I.
Oh, sorry, I think I have a mover and a seconder already.
Well,
I mean, why would we not?
Well,
I'd move it.
I can read the motion, the suggested motion to you, Your Worship.
Sure.
It is recommended that council approve a submission of an application for the Provincial Flood Risk Infrastructure Investment Program in the amount of $47,900, including net HST, for the town of Lunenburg flood study.
So moved.
So moved by the Deputy Mayor and seconded by Councillor Risser.
And Your Worship, we just found out about this last night, so our apologies that it's at this late hour, but it is good news.
Never too late for good news. So any further questions? We're all good to go. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Wonderful. Carry on. We look forward to hopefully positive results. It certainly seems to fit the criteria that you mentioned, Ms. Dagley. Thank you very much. Anything further on the budget before we move on then?
I have nothing further today, Your Worship, no.
Okay. So just a reiteration again about the request for any questions or concerns or interest to be noted or input to provide on this budget, to please get those into Ms. Dagley as soon as possible, and that information is all on our website as to how to do that, or certainly someone could advise if you were to call Town Hall. So the next on the agenda under corporate services, number 2 is proposed provincial amendments to the Nova Scotia Building Code regulations regarding public accessible washrooms in restaurants. And there's a second part of that with the letter from the minister being noted, but would ask that Mr. McDonald, I believe, prepared this report. So would you like to speak to it, please, Mr. McDonald? There you are.
Thank you, Worship. Back in April 14th, Council passed a motion for staff to undertake a report to Council outlining the impacts of the proposed amendments to the Nova Scotia Building Code regulations. And we received a letter from Joe Rogers. He's the Building Code Coordinator, and he outlined proposed amendments to the Building Code regarding accessible requirements for restaurants. And if I could get Heather to just scroll down on the page. I just outlined the legislation provisions with regards to that as well. It's all in relationship to a response to a Human Rights Tribunal decision, which was presented to Council on February 11th. And as a result of that, Council approved and the Mayor submitted a letter of concerns with regards to that decision, especially with regards to accessibility of restaurants, right from not only new restaurants, but also existing restaurants. And it would have an impact on the town of Lunenburg with regards to existing restaurants. But this proposed amendment, and if I could just ask Heather to scroll down a bit. Basically, these amendments change the building code in basically two fashions. Currently, whenever there's a change in use, the building code regulations kick in, and the code requires that new use to be brought up to the existing building code. In this particular case, there is a change where an A2 classification includes restaurants, but it also includes several other uses. Now, these are the building code uses and not a land use bylaw types of uses. So for an example, an art gallery was able to change to a restaurant because it wasn't changing the A2 classification. It did not trigger the new building code requirements. These amendments will require that any use, including those uses in the same use category, the A2 classification, to be brought up to code. So I feel this is a very positive move to make sure that any new restaurant meets the accessibility code requirements. Another example of the change with this amendment will apply to is a two-story building of an area less than 600 square meters, and the restaurant is located on the second story, did not have to provide barrier-free access. But these amendments will now kick in and require that restaurant on the second level to be barrier-free. These proposed amendments do not apply to existing restaurants, only for new restaurants and change of use of an existing space into a restaurant use. I feel that these are very positive amendments going forward. And if we can just scroll down, Heather, if you don't mind. I just made a note in the report that this is basically step one. And step two, there may be future amendments to the building code that will require existing restaurants to be barrier-free. Now, there was talk about like a 3-year period of time, which will allow existing restaurants to be brought up to the barrier-free design standards of the building code. But we don't currently have any information on what that will look like currently. So under these proposed amendments, I think they're very positive, and there is no, this is basically for council's information only, and I don't believe any further action is required at this time. But we may wish to revisit this once the province approves amendments that would apply to existing restaurants in town, because I think that will have a major impact on the town of Lunenburg. And basically any urban center with steep hills to deal with getting into and out of buildings. So that is my report. Thank you very much.
Still muted, Your Worship.
Thank you. Sorry. I was rustling papers, so I turned myself off, but then I forgot to turn myself on. So thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Thanks very much for the work that you've done to get us up to speed on the changes that are coming or in place and those that are coming in the future. I'd agree, there's nothing we need to do at this point in time. I think the amendments that are being made to the building code are important ones, and it's important we're all tasked with trying to be more accessible, and that's only going to get more important as we move forward. I do think it may be helpful to forward this information to our Lunenburg Board of Trade. The fact that I think basically the writing's on the wall, so to speak, with respect to more stringent requirements for restaurants. And that's hinted at in the response from Mr. Rogers that this is just step one, but that doesn't mean that step two isn't forthcoming, and what the time frame of that is, we don't know. But I think it's important for our local businesses to be forewarned of what they may be required to do in future to make their businesses viable. So I don't think it would be a bad idea to share this information. I actually think it would be very helpful to share it with the Board of Trade, for example, so that they can share it with their membership. Any other thoughts on the report? Yes, Councillor Carnevale.
Yes, I agree with Mr. McDonald. As I said on the same accessibility committee for the future, and I think it's a good decision to move that forward as we prepare for restaurants and also other buildings. And that's a welcome report. Thank you for the work on that. Get what I was saying?
We did hear you. Thank you very much. And there is a second part of this agenda item. It's noted that there's a letter from the Minister of Justice giving us notice with regard to some extensions on the Accessibility Act implementation, specific to the restrictions we're living under with COVID-19. So they've been extended. We are part of, and Councillor Carnevale sits on the committee that we have struck in Lunenburg County to try to ensure that we are able to meet the requirements of that act. And Mr. McDonald as well represents us as a staff member on that joint committee. And we do have some extensions because of what we're living under now. Any further comments? There aren't any. We can move on to number 3, 6A3, the Lunenburg Fire Department expense claim policies multiple amendments to allow variances from preset kilometer limits. I have Councillor Mosier there offering notice.
So I would give notice of motion then, Your Worship.
Yes, and I'm just seeking clarification from Ms. Renton. I think we gave notice of motion, and this would be to move, or am I just misremembering from committee work?
Sorry to say, Your Worship, the latter is correct. Notice of motion, to the best of my knowledge, had not yet been given because we were awaiting an indication from the fire department if they were in agreement with these amendments, because they had requested them to address certain situations where they have many people traveling together for training and meetings. So they had agreed with the amendments, and council had put the matter on hold until then. And I think we just ran out of time at prior meetings to deal with this. So yes, this would be notice of motion time.
Great. Thank you for that clarification, and my apologies. And thanks to Councillor Mosier for making that notice of motion. So it will come up as a motion to approve at an upcoming meeting of council. And I think unless there's discussion on that, we need not discuss it further at this point in time. And we can move on to the joint transit report. And this was also a report provided for us by Mr. McDonald. Mr. McDonald, are you able to speak to the joint transit report, please?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I was just having a problem there unmuting. This is a report that came out of the Citizens for Public Transit presentation that they did for council. They recommended that the town work with their counterparts of the town of Mahone Bay, Bridgewater, and municipality of the District of Lunenburg to dissect the study of the CPT report, results and findings, identify a working model suitable to address local needs, investigate potential funding options, prepare a shared governance and operation model, and present a jointly developed recommendations to their respective council. So I provided council with a review of their report. And if I can get Heather just to scroll down, that just talks about the legislation that the municipalities are able to cost share in the regional transportation system. My analysis shows that really the town of Lunenburg cannot do this on its own. The major players would be the municipality, the District of Lunenburg, and the town of Bridgewater. So without their participation, it would be very, I think, cost prohibitive for the town of Lunenburg to set up a regional transportation system. I did outline a plan for council's consideration to establish a working committee of members and staff of each unit to jointly review the CPT report and make recommendations as to a regional transit model, to obtain approval for the implementation of an intermunicipal service agreement with the towns of Lunenburg, Mahone Bay, Bridgewater, and municipality District of Lunenburg based on proposed regional transit model, to establish a Lunenburg County Transit Authority and a board of directors through the service agreement, and to undertake a one-year pilot project between Bridgewater, Mahone Bay, and Lunenburg, subject to the approval of the funding partners. Basically, I don't believe, and I stand corrected, whether or not the municipality, the District of Lunenburg, or the town of Bridgewater has actually approached the town of Lunenburg with regards to this provision, but I think really the ball is really in their court to ask us and say the town of Mahone Bay to participate. As I previously stated, under the cost and resource allocations, based on uniform assessment, the major player would be the municipality of District of Lunenburg. Therefore, without their participation, it's doubtful whether we could actually undertake the funding and the costs for operation, for establishment, as well as the operation of a regional transit system. The report provided by the CTP was a project cost or shortfall of roughly $250,000 to $300,000. And so I looked at the uniform assessment. I also looked at, if we could scroll it down a little bit further, Heather, if you would please. Based on uniform assessment, it's also, we're like the small player with regards to looking at the costs associated with running such a system. Now, if we go down further, Heather, if we could, yes. But it was the population as well as the uniform assessment that I took a look at. And so you can see from that chart under population municipality, the District of Lunenburg makes up roughly 68.9% of the population of the region. And the town of Lunenburg makes up a 6.4%. So we're really a small player with regards to establishment and operation of the regional transportation system. Of course, if we proceed, and there is an option that the mayor sits on the Mayors and Wardens Committee to actually bring this up at some future meeting for discussion purposes to see if there's any willingness from the municipality of the District of Lunenburg as well as the town of Bridgewater to participate in a regional transportation system. I think that would be a very good start. Without their support, I really do not see how we can actually proceed with the establishment of a regional transit system. So basically, Heather, if we could scroll down to the recommendations. Oh. Okay, there we go. As I previously stated, without the support of the municipality, the District of Lunenburg, and the town of Bridgewater, with an existing transportation system, the ability to establish a regional transit service is cost prohibitive. So we definitely need their support. It is recommended at this time that due to financial concerns compounded by COVID-19 pandemic, not to proceed at this time to initiate discussions with the region's municipalities regarding their proposed regional transit system as outlined in the CPT report. Now, things may change after a year or two. And if things do change and the economy gets back on where it was pre-COVID-19, and if council wishes to discuss the possibility of establishing a regional transit system, it is recommended that further discussions with neighboring municipalities should be had with regards to their support for a regional transportation service. I also noted in my report, from staff's perspective, I don't see two transit authorities operating within the region. I would recommend that the Bridgewater Transit Authority be contacted and see if they're interested in operating a regional transportation service. And if a county-wide transit authority establishment is established, then the Bridgewater Transit Authority should definitely have representatives on the board.
Right.
So that's basically my report at this time. If you have any questions or comments, please advise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. It was a very thorough analysis, I think, of the report we were provided by the Citizens for Public Transit. Certainly this current state of affairs we find ourselves in aren't conducive to moving a lot of things forward, but this certainly falls in that category, I believe. And the suggestion about bringing it forward to the mayors, other mayors and wardens, just as a discussion point, The deputy mayor may remember, I think we were kind of charged with doing that at the next time we met, which has since been postponed, given the state of emergency as well. So I'm not sure when that dialogue might be possible, but it certainly could be just broached as a topic of interest, or to gauge the interest of our neighboring municipalities in this subject, as we had intended to do previously. Any other comments or thoughts with respect to this? Yes. Oh, goodness. Okay, I think I saw Councillor Visser, and then the deputy mayor, and then Councillor Mosier, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly appreciate that we're in a, the cliched unprecedented time, and that this would be impossible to go ahead with without our Lunenburg County partners. But I don't see any issue with having discussions in the interim. In fact, something of this magnitude is probably going to take years to bring to fruition. So it might be opportune to have the discussions now and start planning now for when the reality can hopefully become the case.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Your Worship, I've been skeptical more of the numbers right from the beginning of this. That any of the feasibility studies that I've seen, the way they determine the ridership is very questionable, including this report, where they just say, for instance, that the town of Bridgewater, everybody in Bridgewater will travel 1.5 times this year, or in the first year. And as far as the costing of it, I haven't seen a single feasibility study right from the beginning, which didn't end up with a single rider cost of over $20, and they're charging in some cases $2 and $3. I think financially it's very questionable, the numbers that they come up with. The examples that they show, like the one in Bridgewater, I see people waiting for the bus, but it's a very small, tight-knit area that they travel in, and Bridgewater seems to manage well with it. King's Transit, which they also use as an example, there's a much bigger population. They go up and down the 101, and they don't vary from that. The example that they use in Chester, I think it was well over $24 per rider, and they were charging $2, I believe. And you'd be better off just paying cabs. I'm just saying, I don't trust the numbers. I can see all the anecdotal stuff, but I just don't trust the ridership they're expecting, and I'm not sure we can afford the total costs that they're looking at per rider. So I'm still really skeptical about it. So,
thank you for your thoughts, Councillor Mosier.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I'm not as I'm a little more positive on this. I mean, who would have thought, with all this discussion that we've had over the past 8 years or so since I've been on council, how positive and how well the Bridgewater model has worked. So, but regarding this, and when we first started discussing this, one of the biggest, I guess, hurdles was who was going to take ownership of it, like what municipality, was going to take ownership of that. So I think right now that's obvious. It would be Bridgewater. They already have a system in place. So some of the questions I think we need to ask before we would abandon this is, first of all, is Bridgewater willing to expand into the other municipalities? And then if so, are the other municipalities, willing to work together to make it happen? And then we're going to see what it costs and what it would look like, and then continue on. So I think we should keep it alive and the discussion open. And I'm not sure, if the mayor's and wardens is probably a good spot to initiate that, because it's hard for just one unit to, wave the banner and get everybody on board, because MODL is vast. So when you show these numbers and what they will contribute compared to their population, the reality is they're not going to reach all their population. There's some areas that it's just not feasible for them to go. But so they may actually contribute a lot less than what it may look like in a model. And the town of Lunenburg and Mahone Bay may be a more major contributor. And then obviously Bridgewater is going to be the service provider. So it's not like they're contributing. They're going to be looking for us to contribute to their extra cost to provide the service for us. So I just think we should keep the dialogue open. I think mayors and wardens is a great place to start. And then maybe, you know, again, like we had a great committee there, the past council with, you know, all the municipalities involved, and we worked hard at a solution that was really, I mean, we were swimming hard against the current, and we still managed to, you know, even though we couldn't fulfill what the mandate, I think we still discovered a lot of good information. And I think this is something that is good for the future, and at some point in time will be relevant and will work.
Thank you. Councillor Carnavale.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. I would have to agree with Councillor Mosier and Councillor Rizzer. I sat on the Citizens Committee for 3 years, and I think we have to keep it alive because as time goes on, that's going to have to happen. Anywhere, transit doesn't pay for itself. You look at Toronto, Montreal, money is pumped into the service all the time. So I think we move ahead with that and keep it alive, because eventually it has to happen. Thank you very much.
I think Councillors Bachman or Croft, do you have any thoughts on this subject? Councillor Croft, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see any issue keeping it alive for now and then seeing where it goes from here. I'm like John, I just think the numbers just don't justify the means in a sense that we really don't know what the ridership in Lunenburg is going to be. And how we can determine that, I don't know. If there's any way to go up and ask the public, will they use it? Is it something we need in our community? And maybe a lot of that work has been done, I think, through the transit committee. But I think just you know, moving forward, just keep the dialogue open and see where it goes.
Thank you. I'm hearing a greater weight on keeping some dialogue going as opposed to just dropping it with this council. As Councillor Mosier pointed out, there was in existence a joint transit committee that had been in place over both the previous terms that I served on council. And it was, you know, it's the idea is growing. I think growing in acceptance as time has gone on. I'm somewhat concerned about the idea of just leaving it to mayors and wardens if there's a real initiative or a real will of council to moving it or to keeping it at the forefront, because really mayors and wardens is a discussion point topic, and there's no obligation or there's no, you know, the deputy mayor and I sit on that body as a you know, kind of way to weigh things out and to have some discussion. But the mayors can't be representative necessarily of their councils. They're just kind of information gathering and sharing opportunities, which serve a purpose. But if there is a will on this council now to ensure that there is some dialogue continued, I think it might be wise to formally write a letter to the other councils, perhaps sharing Mr. McDonald's report or portions of it as we might see fit, to indicate that we have looked at this a little more seriously and we are willing to have further or interested in having further discussions on the topic. But as the report points out, we won't get very far on our own, and it's a moot point if other councils are not going to continue to study the idea. But if there is interest, I think that's the appropriate way to figure that out. Yes, Councillor Risser.
I'll move that.
Move that a letter be written to the other municipal councillors. Was that a second, Councillor Carnavale? I'm not always sure of your hand raising.
I'll second it.
Oh, okay, thank you, Councillor Mosier. So we will write a letter, moving to write a letter to the three municipal councils, asking if they were interested in continuing the dialogue on joint transit. Is that what we should call it? Joint. With respect to this Citizens for Public Transit report. And I guess, is that all we need to say? I'm looking for, since I'm putting words in people's mouths, I just want to, yes, Councillor Mosier.
Thanks, Your Worship. Kind of breaking up a little bit at the moment. You've been just talking, just to let you know. But aside from that, yeah, I was just thinking too. I mean, sometimes if we make this too big, it may, you know, it gets too big and fails. And I mean, I'd be even interested to ask the municipality of Bridgewater to see, hey, would you be interested in sending a bus over to Lunenburg, and what would that look like? And could we afford, and see if we can afford to do that? And if it does look like something that it might be reasonable to do, then we might, you know, reach out to Mahone Bay. Actually, you know, if they made that triangle, then that would again be a little more cost effective perhaps. And then the municipality, if they wanted people to get on the bus on that route, then maybe they contribute. But maybe if we start small and let's look after ourselves, we could look at a way of expanding it, at least in that triangle, which was sort of like what we originally wanted to do way back when too.
Okay, so that's a little bit different than what I first suggest, or what I was thinking was put forth. Would you want to amend that motion then? Yes, sorry, Councillor Risser wants in too. I'm not sure what order. Councillor Risser, you go ahead.
I appreciate Councillor Mosier's point about going slow and piloting and all that stuff, but I think that's a little premature at this stage. I think all we have to do is write a letter to see what level of interest there is in other municipalities. And I'm sure if there's enough interest, some working group will be struck and can discuss, you know, piloting and how to move forward in an appropriate way.
So the motion you put forth would be and I'm just clarifying here, a general letter of, is there interest in further discussions directed to the other municipal units? Is that right, Councillor Risser?
Well, I think so. I mean, I'm open to, it's, you know, we can amend it, but I don't think we need to do anything more than that at this stage.
So, and Councillor Mosier, you wanted to clarify or speak to that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that too. At least that gets us around the table and the discussion can start. So that's good for now.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion on that then? Ms. Renton, can you share with us what you have captured for that motion before I ask for the vote?
Yes, thanks for asking, Your Worship. I was going to suggest that because I was kicked off the Zoom call there. Moved and seconded that a letter be written to the 3 other municipal councils asking if they are interested in discussing joint transit options in response to the Citizens for Public Transit report. But I was off for about 3 minutes, so perhaps I missed part of the motion amendment if there was one, Your Worship.
Sounds perfect to me.
Councillor Risser moved and is fine with that. So are any further discussion, or are we okay to have the question called? All right, all in favor of the motion? Any opposed? No, motion is carried. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. McDonald, for all your work, as I think we mentioned earlier. Am I still breaking up, folks? A little bit? Okay. Maybe wearing out the system here. We are past the hour. We don't have a recess, so maybe until some time away, but maybe we'll get through just one more item on our agenda and then we'll break for a brief recess. So the municipal election update, the returning officer notice of polling divisions as per the Municipal Election Act. So that was fairly straightforward, I believe, to that point.
That's right, Your Worship. The returning officer provides that as a statutory update. I dare say, though, there might be additional changes in view of COVID-19 and physical distancing, if there's going to be a need to have smaller polling divisions and more of them spread around the auditorium. But that'll be determined in the future months.
Great. So there aren't any formal approvals of these required. It's just an information point that we're required to be informed of at this point in time. Just asking Ms. Renton. You.
Yes, that's correct, Your Worship. It's a little bit of a historical, I think, notice. It's kind of odd to be notified of that, but that's part of the Municipal Election Act requirements. So I would assume perhaps if there were some issues that council had, maybe they thought the polling divisions were too large. That maybe that would be an issue that the council of the day would want to weigh in on. So it's provided for notice.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Croft, do you have a question or comment on with respect to this?
To be then on poll 1 and 2 Harborview and the Veterans Unit, are those an all-day sort of polling, or are they just have certain hours set up for those?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. They are split. They do part of the day. I can't remember if it's the morning or afternoon at Harborview Haven, and then the other one is held at Harborview Haven, and then they go back to the main polling station at the community center auditorium for the count. But you're right, they are only held for part of the day in both of those two locations to facilitate voting for the residents.
It's a good question, Councillor Croft. I actually knew that answer simply because I worked that poll once upon a time. It was a very interesting poll to be in charge of, believe me, but a very important one as well. So there aren't any further questions. I was interested to review that and to see how many. We do have ample polls, I think, for the size of our community, but as Ms. Renton notes, we could be in for even more changes since we have not been given any further direction on how we may be able to conduct an election this fall. So I suspect there may not affect the polling stations, however. So it's all left to be seen, I believe. So having said that, and noting that we are at 3:13 and we're scheduled to go just till 4, I would recommend that or ask that we all take a recess, and perhaps we can reconvene at 3:25 and resume the meeting at that point in time. See you shortly. Hello, are we back online? You can all hear me. I was trying my headphones and I don't know if it was that or that we weren't back online yet, that that no one could hear what I was saying. Trying to improve the audio a bit, but maybe we'll do that a trial run another time. Everyone can hear me okay now? Yes, okay, great. So I will call our meeting back to order and we'll continue on with the agenda as we left off. Oh, and I better just check, make sure Ms. Renton is with us.
Yes, I am, Your Worship. Thank you for asking.
Great, thank you. And I assume Heather is, since we're functioning. So that's our indication.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Great. So we'll carry on then with 6.6, and that is committee meeting minutes, supporting documents discussion. And that there was no supporting material that came from a request from a previous meeting that we talk about how the supporting documents are in our agenda package. And you'll note that we have a couple of options in our agenda package these days. There's the full agenda package with all the supporting schedules and supporting documents to staff reports. And then there's an abridged or a briefer version, which just has the reports. And that can be continued if that's found to be helpful. It takes staff a little bit of extra time, but not a tremendous amount, I've been told. So just wanting to check in to see if that sort of meets the expectations that council had hoped for with earlier comments. Anybody? Yes, Councillor Mosher?
Well, it meets my expectations. Just, my iPad's getting a little rusty here in its age, and as Lisa can attest to, but I tried to open up the full package. It wouldn't open it up. It was just rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling forever. So, but no, it works for me. I think that's fine. If I need anything specific, I usually go in it, in the one-off column anyway. So works fine.
Great. Any other comments, thoughts? I think the deputy mayor had brought this up originally, I think. Is it working for you this way, Deputy Mayor?
I haven't used that as an option yet, but I can see where it's of value. So I'm still loading the whole package, but again, my thought was that it may not be necessary to get some of that stuff. So so I'm fine with loading it all and not having to access it. So I think having the option is good.
Great. Councillor Carnavelli, had you wish to speak?
Yeah. Yes, I just want to say that I like the shorter version. Then if I need something more in depth, I know where to go. So I'm good with the shorter version. But I use both if I have to. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think as Councillor Mosher mentioned, they're all there, and it's easier, I find, to access them outside of the package if the report is there, and just loading the shorter version for meetings is I think a little more user friendly. So thanks staff for that adaptation. So if there aren't any further comments or issues, we'll ask them to continue on with that. I'm assuming that's the consensus, hearing nothing to the contrary. And so then we'll move along with number 7 and the draft amendments to policy number 66, interim and final tax billings. And this was given as a notice to motion at a previous meeting, and a motion to approve now as an order by the deputy mayor.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, it gives me great pleasure to make this motion, which basically the significant change is dropping the interest percentage from 2% down to 1.5% for a penalty interest. So I would move that policy change in policy number 66, interim and final tax billings.
Thank you. Is there seconded by Councillor Croft? And anyone wish to speak further to that? No, it was discussed at a previous meeting. No interest in further discussion. I can ask for the vote then. All in favor of this change? Anyone opposed? I think not. We'd all voted in favor, so the motion is carried and the amendments will be made. Also, in a similar fashion, draft amendments to policy number 71, low income property tax relief. And Councillor Mosier, I believe, was going to make the motion.
Yes, Your Worship, I would so move that motion for the policy change, policy number 71, low income property tax relief.
Thank you. And is there a seconder for that motion? I see Councillor a number, but I saw Councillor Risser's first. So Councillor Risser seconding that motion. I just want to comment, I want to thank staff for bringing this to our attention. I think there might be room to change those numbers even more so at some point in the future, but in the interests of not knowing all the background to doing that, I think it's important that this amendment be made. Any further comments? Call for the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Mosier, I assume you're in favor. Didn't see your hand. Uh-oh. Councillor Mosier, are you?
Oh, we may have lost Councillor Mosier.
Oh, there you are. Councillor Mosier, I think you froze on us momentarily. Can I ask if you made the motion? I assume you were in favor of it, but I didn't see that. So just clarifying that you.
Yeah, you were frozen and then everybody disappeared.
Oh, sorry.
I do. Yeah, I vote in favor of the motion.
Okay, the motion then is unanimously voted in favor of, and so it's approved. Thanks very much. Technology, here we go. So that being approved, then we can move on to the next item, which is another motion for approval for changes to the draft or the council and committee meetings procedural policy. Well, a motion to approve that policy, which was a draft policy. And Councillor Risser?
So moved.
Moving the approval of that policy. Is there seconded by Councillor Carnavale? Any changes or errors or omissions, more further comments? We worked, I think, fairly long and hard on this, so it's nice to see it come forward. So all in favor of the council and committee meetings proceedings policy? And there's all in favor, so no one would be opposed, and that is approved. Motion is approved. Another, again, quite similar. This is a revised work on private property policy with a motion required to approve that, please. And Councillor Bachman's name was there.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Bachman. Is there a seconder for the approval of that amended policy, revised policy? Or Councillor Risser, thank you. So any discussion then on the revised work on private property policy? Ready for the question? All in favor? And we are all in favor, so there would be no one opposed, and that motion is carried. We have another revision to talk about, and that's to our parking meter bylaw. Their motion to give first reading and advertise the proposed revised bylaw, and the deputy mayor name is beside that.
Your worship, there are significant changes in it. A lot of them are just to bring the bylaw make it more current, but there's also some changes in it which will make future changes a lot easier and not require a change to the bylaw. a lot of syntax kind of changes to it. Unlike the others where there's maybe one small change, this is quite a, and we have had significant discussion about it, but I would move a notice of motion for the first reading and that we advertise the proposed revised bylaw.
Okay. And looking to, I see Mr. Burke is with us and or Ms. Renton just advise it. Is it not a motion with the seconder to approve for first reading, or is it just a notice of motion that's required at this stage with it because it's a bylaw?
It's a motion, Your Worship. So yes, a mover and seconder would be in order.
Okay.
I stand corrected, Your Worship. It's not a notice of motion.
That's
It's a
fine.
motion.
Thank you for moving that. But I do need a seconder to take this to first reading. Councillor Carnavale making or seconding that motion. So the deputy mayor mentioned a number of the changes that were made and noting, and I applaud the amendments. Some of them were just, making the language more direct and bringing some points up to date. And the significant ones, I think Mr. Burke mentioned in the cover letter, but did you want to remind us of those or make any points of interest, Mr. Burke, further to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. The changes were reviewed at the General Government Committee meeting, but essentially this bylaw is modeled more on the Halifax model. Previously, we had the number of hours for each meter on each street in the bylaw itself. We've taken that out. We've allowed us to set the rates, and that would be done presumably by policy because that's normally the way that rates are set. It has, as you've indicated, we've simplified the procedure in great part and clarified. We've added a provision that you can't block a parking spot by putting cones out or that sort of thing. So that's an offense now. And I think it's probably more readable than the previous version.
Thank you for that. Yes, I found it much more user-friendly this time around. And there were some changes and noticed the fees would, or the fine amount was changed, as you noted, and the provision about making the use of cones to block spaces, which I think was kind of one of the things that brought this revision to the fore. So I think that's an important change to be noted. So any further discussion or thoughts to offer on this revised bylaw? If there aren't any, we would need to vote then on the motion to give first reading and then advertise the proposed changes to move forward. So calling for the question, I cannot see Councillor Mosier again at the moment. Oh, there you are. Okay, good. So just need you there for the vote. So all in favor of first reading? And that is everyone. So no one to opposed. And so first reading is approved, and we will look forward to seeing this for final approval at a future meeting. I actually did have a note that it's voted on, and so that's fine, but just as I guess a further consideration for potential, a very, very minor change, but I noticed the pronoun for the finance director was indicated as her throughout, which she is, and we're grateful that we have her. And I'm just throwing out the idea of using the neutral pronoun of their which is becoming more and more acceptable, even though it kind of goes against the grain for those of us who grew up with strict grammatical rules of masculine and feminine and plural, but it certainly, I think, might be worthy of consideration in the revised draft.
Your worship, would you like me to make the change for the second reading, or?
I just kind of threw it out there. I sort of missed the opportunity before we voted. I don't know how other members of council feel about it. If they want to leave it until I've got some thumbs up to have that changed. If Councillor Mosier doesn't object, we could do that for the draft that would be advertised.
Okay, will do.
Thank you very much. So we had our recess. So now we move into 6B for Public Works. And we did see this report previously and had some discussion and actually defeated the motion that was recommended. So it's coming back to us for further consideration, and that is with respect to the Tannery Road sidewalk project. And so I'm not sure if we need staff input at the beginning to set it up for us. We've been through it once, but Mr. Tillard certainly is here and can speak to it. But are there members of council who have thoughts to carry this forward? Yes, Councillor Mosier.
Thanks, Your Worship. Well, I read the report again. It's basically the same report we had before, so there's nothing new there to my knowledge. I didn't compare the two side by side, but it looks very familiar. I think we should be looking for an in-house solution to this. I don't see any reason we need to have consultants again come in and tell us to put speed bumps on the Tannery Road or something, crazy like that. I made a point to drive down by there today, and if the sidewalk is and the street is fairly narrow on that one end that's mentioned, like along the Angus Walters house and the next property, the other side of the road is ample room. So we could run the sidewalk down along that way for a point of time and then cross over on to the other side. I just think there's very obvious ways that can be accomplished without spending countless amounts of hours and dollars, staff time and hours, time and money for consultants. We didn't seem to need these things when we extended the sidewalk on Green Street. We didn't seem to need these things when we extended the sidewalk on Dufferin Street. It seemed to be a pretty simple process. Staff just went and voted. Public Works built sidewalks, and Bob's your uncle. It's all done lickety split. And I don't see any reason why we can't find some in-house solutions to this problem. It's building a sidewalk, for goodness sakes. It's not something that is out of our expertise. We do this all the time.
I'd suggest I could ask our staff to weigh in. I know that this has been an initiative or a project of council from the previous council. It was actually initiated in the previous council and has kind of been adopted by the current council. It has gone through, we've been through various variations of it, which is, I think, why we are where we are, because varying staff members who have come on in succession have had different ideas as to how to best handle it, because it's not as typical a landscape as the side of the road for many other streets in the community. So I think that's where the challenges are. And of course, we do still have some challenges when it comes to capacity in our town public works. As far as engineering is concerned, we're grateful to have Mr. Tillard, who's working for us on a part-time basis. But that's where I would see the challenge is for someone with the appropriate amount of expertise to have the time to dedicate to it. And I think that's where we're not for ability necessarily, but to have the time. So it would be, you know, a particular project to be taken on by an outside organization, much the way we have Mr. Tillard's services for other areas of concern in the community. To contract this piece out is how, you know, when I reread it, as you said, Councillor Mosier, I do think it's the same, that no one was asked to make amendments, that we just wanted to revisit this report and this issue. And I think we shared the concern that it not be dropped off the table completely, that it was an important project to get forward, to move ahead somehow, but it just how to do that poses the challenge. But are there other, yes, Councillor Bachman.
I think it's something we need to try and pursue. I tend to agree with Councillor Mosier with the fact that there's been 2 or 3 kicks at the can, and different organizations or firms have studied this, and basically it's the same thing. You need to put a sidewalk down the side of the road. Now, mind you, there are quite a few hurdles to jump as far as telephone poles and some easements for property and that type of thing. But I think we need to go ahead with this, even if it's little bits and pieces at a time. We currently own the Angus Walters property, so we can do whatever we need to across the face of that property now and get it done and in place. And if we consider to sell the property afterwards, then it's already done. The new owner would know what they were getting before they purchased, rather than us sell it and then have to turn around and negotiate some kind of a deal with a new owner. So realizing that that corner is where we need to start, and is also one of the most difficult places, I think, while we own that property, would certainly be the time to go ahead and at least go across part of the property there. Also, some of the other sections down along the ABCO pieces of property, I think they were more than willing to work with us a year or 2 ago, and hopefully they would still be continue to do that. And maybe we could, you know, we may have to drop it for several pieces of property where we need to negotiate and where their poles would be in the way, but I don't think there's too many obstructions across some of the ABCO property that we could maybe then pick it up and start there again. And the more you could get people off of the road and up on a sidewalk, even if it was only a temporary sidewalk in a couple of places until we work out some of the details in the more cumbersome spots, I think would at least be a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Risser and then Councillor Croft, please.
Thank you, Worship. I agree with Councillor Mosier that this is a pretty core municipal responsibility that we should be able to handle. And if we can, I think that requires a different conversation about corporate capacity.
Councillor Croft.
Your Worship, I would agree with Councillor Mosier's comments. I think if we look at the extension of the sidewalk that goes from in front of the high school there, or the school, and take it along that side down Tannery Road on the properties there, going down on the right-hand side towards the golf course, that would make sense to do that, and then have a crossover where it's appropriate, rather than at that intersection. I think you need a certain sight of line there before you can do a crossover anyway. So I think that would be my suggestion too, to look at that and move forward. So yeah, along the cross on the Chemical Road side there, in front of a couple dwellings there, I think we have room there to put that sidewalk. So.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Carnevale.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to agree with Councillor Mosier. I think it's something that we have talented staff in the operations department. I think we're able to do that, you know, on ourselves and save some money. So I would agree with that. If you catch what I'm saying. So I'm in favor of us doing the work ourselves instead of going out and spending more money. I think we have the talent in the operations department to get the work done.
I would ask perhaps that, I don't know if Ms. Renton or Mr. Tillard would want to weigh in at this point. It's nice to see council's faith in our staff's ability. I guess that I'm wondering if that was the question, or if there's other factors at play here. And I guess timing is a concern. We have identified other priorities in our budget process for our Public Works Department, and particularly the management staff there. So is it a possibility that any part of this planning or project could be undertaken in the coming year? And is that what, I guess I'm not, I believe that's what council in their comments is suggesting could happen, but we would need to know staff's perspective on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll defer to Mr. Tillard on that as the town engineer, but I guess, first of all, just to clarify, there has only ever been one sketch done for the sidewalk layout by ABL Engineering out of, Able Engineering, sorry, out of Chester, getting my ABLs mixed up. And we felt it was important to show council the conundrum that was presented by that intersection layout at Tannery, Kinnickle. And much as you've talked about, what would be the best layout there? Is it to take it across to the opposite intersection at the civic number 40 on the opposite corner, and then bring it over to the Captain Angus Walters House? So certainly that's something we can incorporate in another design. My understanding from speaking with Public Works and in the preparation of this report by that department is that they did not feel they had the capacity to build the entire sidewalk. There'd be issues of excavation, just the duration of it. But perhaps if it was broken down in phases, that might be something that Mr. Tillard could consider, and I'll leave it to him to best determine that. So I'll turn it over to him, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, there are some complications on this project, such as the power poles, and they're pretty loaded up, those power poles. It's certainly not something we would entertain touching those. So maybe there's a possibility. I think we have to walk through the site again and break it down into smaller pieces and figure out what we could do internally without sacrificing too much, and what we would need to tender. Certainly power poles is one. Likely there's some the tree removal, of course, would have to be done by someone else. But anyway, we could walk it and see how we can break that down. The one issue we haven't really addressed, and that is we've kept our workforces well separated. We haven't really addressed the possibility of us working together, physically together, and what measures we would have to undertake to do that. And so that's certainly a step we'd have to make before we could even entertain doing anything like this, because this does require close proximity. And there are likely going to be contractors out there that gear themselves up for this because they want to stay working, stay in business, when we haven't really addressed it. So we'll have to look at that as well. So I could perhaps put a plan together for us to internally have a look at this piece by piece and see how we can break it down, what we can possibly accomplish in-house, and what would actually must be done outside. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tillard. So would it be then, in order for us to await a further report from you with respect to what the department might be able to provide by way of a plan and execution thereof, in the coming year? This-
Yes, I think so, Your Worship. That would be appropriate. And I think it seems to me, since I've been here, every 2 months we write a report about the Tannery Road sidewalk. So why not? Why not another one? Huh?
So if that's what will move it forward, is there a consensus of council that the further report be provided, I guess, to the end as what to handle it in the way that I think council was suggesting it needs to go? Yes. Okay, so we will look forward to a further report on that then. There was no motion to that effect. Is that preferable? I know it's always preferable, but would you like that as in the form of a motion, Ms. Renton?
Well, I'm just wondering, Your Worship, some clarity on the point. I think what you're asking us to do, or for Public Works to do, is to look at the realignment of Tannery Road and Kinickle, looking at pulling the crosswalk over to the adjacent corner so that you would cross over to the building opposite Captain Angus Walters and cross at that juncture. And then how to phase in perhaps the first part of the sidewalk in front of Captain Angus Walters, and how far we could take it down there by ourselves in-house. Would that be a helpful point to focus on?
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. I had some of my own, but I saw Councillor Risser and Councillor Bachman had questions about that as well. So go ahead, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, my understanding is just that we're awaiting a report with a plan. I don't think anybody on council is an engineer, so I'm not sure we should get into the planning. We just want to see staff produce a plan. Am I wrong in that? I'm happy to be correct.
So Ms. Renton was suggesting some components of the plan, but we're not giving the intention of council is not to give direction on what the plan looks like, just that we would like a plan that our staff believes they can also execute by way of
in-house, Your Worship. Is it because there is a plan that's set out on page 2 of Mr. Tillard's report for moving the project ahead? There's 7 steps that are set out there, but this is for an in-house construction that you'd like a plan for.
Yes, well, and as originally planned is also in that report from Mr. Tillard, and we realize there's some challenges that have been posed with the original plan, so that may have an impact as well. But perhaps Councillor Bachman should weigh in as he's requested. Go ahead.
I agree with Councillor Risser that I'd just like to see a plan first. And to me, it might be easier and more feasible to start from the golf course end of Tannery Road and work this way rather than the Captain Angus Walters and work the other way. And whichever we could accomplish first and easiest, to me, would be preferable. Any time or any way we can get people safely off of the road and onto a sidewalk, to me, I don't care which end we start at, but if we could accomplish at least a little bit of it, I think that would be preferable.
Councillor Croft?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we just need to start with a phased-in approach and budget so much every year for the project and get this thing underway. If we look at just the drawing there and look at in front of Civic number 40 and 44, and then maybe it's a phase 1 project, get that much done at the start and take it from there. But again, leave it up to staff to put a report together.
So I guess, and there is some confusion because we've kind of given the expectation that it should be all done in-house. And Mr. Tillard was, I think, suggesting that there are parts that cannot be done in-house, such as moving poles and that sort of thing, which is noted in that original report about contracting with NSPI and contract to have trees removed. Which would need to be done before the sidewalk is actually constructed, which is what I think a lot of the reference has been to as far as what our capability is. So I think we need to clarify what we do expect to get in a new reiteration of this. And Councillor Mosier and the Deputy Mayor wanted to speak further.
Well, I hate to oversimplify this, and I don't mean to be in any way disrespectful, but, you know, give me a can of spray paint and I can show you where the, you know, a track where the sidewalk's gonna go. And when you can avoid obstacles, you will avoid them. And we know that in some cases, yes, a tree may have to come down and we might need, you know, someone skilled to do a task that for us, but we just need to know where it's gonna go. I like the thought of implementing it in phases. It helps us, you know, fiscally. So, you know, it's not that complicated, as I said at the beginning. And I think we should just get something going that council can agree on where it goes, and then we can execute the plan.
So Deputy Mayor, you wanted to speak as well?
Well, I don't know if this is a crazy idea, but you know, I often wonder whether we should be thinking in terms of trail as opposed to sidewalk. You know, Mr. Burke may be able to comment on, you know, what's going on with the, or what will go on with the, you know, the land changes in around the Angus Walters buildings and the school next to it. But, you know, could it be a trail that goes behind the Angus Walters house? You know, could we get cooperation from APCO and the houses that they're committing to leave there, that it would be a trail behind those houses and avoid, you know, the narrowness of that road and telephone poles and everything? Is that, I'm not sure if that's a you know, a crazy idea or something that we should at least walk over and have a look at, whether we could go behind the buildings instead of going in along the road. Because what, as a sidewalk, I mean, who is the sidewalk for? It's going to be a lot for tourists and not so much for kids walking to school, although they could still, you know, use that route. There's still that, but you know, that might be there might be a solution somewhere in there as well.
So I don't know if Mr. Burke's able to comment on that now. I see he's there.
Yeah, yes, Your Worship. In order to go behind the Angus Walters building, I would think one would have to go over property which is now of Lunenburg Foundry, and then 2 residential properties of ABCO, another iteration of ABCO, and then come out somewhere onto Tannery Road near the ABCO Industries property. I think you would probably have some difficulty in getting agreement. You might be able to expropriate, but you then get into the issue of valuation and how much that diminishes the value of their property and that sort of thing.
So not simple, but possible, I guess.
Possible, yeah.
Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Worship. I think at this stage, we're sort of getting into a staff level discussion, so maybe we could just, I'd call for the question so we can get the report.
I don't know that we actually have a motion nor the question defined. I think that's where we're bogged down in this discussion. Ms. Renton, where we hadn't formed it as a question at this point, although I think that's where what we were trying to do. Can you clarify for me?
Yes, Your Worship. I have the consensus recorded as follows, and certainly subject to change if I have failed to capture it correctly. Council asked staff to prepare a supplementary report regarding how town public works staff can construct the sidewalk on a phased-in basis as necessary.
So I have some agreement by show of thumbs up that seems fine, that people are in favor of what you've written as being the will of the room or the virtual room. So thank you for that, and we'll accept that as the will of council and look forward to what that looks like from staff's perspective at an upcoming meeting. So we are just past the 4 o'clock hour, which is our designated time for completion of the meeting. We have 2 other items on our agenda. Neither I think are particularly time consuming, although we've made that claim before and it's been unfounded. But if you'd like, we could I either move to adjourn or move to complete the agenda. And Councillor Risser, you want to go comment?
I'll move to adjourn.
And you are seconding that, Councillor Carnival? Yes, yes. So you can, I don't
Yes,
think
I
we
am.
have discussion on a motion to adjourn, so we'd have to vote on the motion. So all in favor of a motion to adjourn? See, and opposed? So we will not adjourn. The motion is defeated. So Councillor Mosier, would you like to speak?
Well, we're gonna miss item 7A1 if we don't soon act on it. Because May will be over.
Valid point. So there are 2 items left. Would we have a motion to extend to deal with one or both?
I will move that we definitely do the one for 7A1.
Move that. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Croft? And then we can worry about the next motion after that, I suppose. Okay, so all in favor of extending for 7A1? And opposed? Councillor Carnavale is opposing, but the motion is carried.
No, I was not opposing. My hand was slow getting
Okay,
up
I'm
to
sorry.
agree with.
So you're
I'm in favor.
in favor. So we will, the motion is carried and we will deal with 7A1 corporate services. And so that, I think we had seen this before. It was on our last agenda and we didn't have sufficient time to deal with it, but there is a draft proclamation prepared for our approval, recognizing this month of May. And thank you for sharing that, Ms. McCallum, as Lyme Disease Awareness Month, which would require a motion of council to so declare.
So moved.
So sorry, I heard Councillor Bachman first, so moved, and Councillor Croft, I could have picked, but anyway, Councillor Croft seconds. So all in favor of that motion? Motion is approved, and so we will so declare this month of May as Lyme Disease Awareness Month. Thank you very much for that. So we do have one other item on our agenda. And so again, I need a motion to deal with that or to adjourn. Yes, Councillor Bachman.
I think we can deal with the other item 6C fairly quickly, so I move that we deal with that item before we reset or adjourn.
It's seconded by Councillor Croft. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. So we will deal with the item from our Recreation Department with regard to sharing the road signage. And there was a report which I've lost prepared for us with respect to that. I know Ms. Cunningham was with us, and yes, she's still there if needed. And Councillor Bachman, did you want to speak to this as chair?
Just going to say, as chair of the Recreation Committee, I make the motion to approve what's before us.
So is there a seconder for that motion? That
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Carnavale, thank you. And it is moved by Councillor Bachman, seconded by Councillor Carnavale for staff to include the purchase, share the road signs in the current 2021 budget to be installed at the main entrance into Lunenburg at Victoria, Green, Dufferin, and Maple. So any discussion with respect to that? All in favor then? Any opposed? There's no one opposed, so the motion is carried and those signs will be purchased and erected. So that then should conclude the business on our agenda today. So thank you for indulging those extra few minutes to get that looked after. And I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Mosier, seconded by Councillor Croft. All in favor? No one is left to oppose. So a motion is carried. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much. We'll see you next week.